Terwyl die minister van Polisie Bekkie Cele rustig deur uitgebrande winkelsentrums toer en die staatsintelligensiegemeenskap beklei oor wie te blameer is vir die geweld van laasweek, hou Andrew Whitfield van die DA, die SAPD en regering op hul tone met skerp vrae oor die polisie se aanspreeklikheid. Andrew, welcome to the show. The police minister denies that he received a report of intelligence from the Minister of Intelligence warning about these riots. Who should we believe?
Well, I don't think we should be surprised by the lack of intelligence. It appears that nobody really knows what is actually going on, which is completely terrifying. And as I said earlier this week, if it is true, it is unacceptable. And if it is not true, it is unacceptable. All the ministers in the security cluster should be speaking from the same page, led by the president himself. And what we've seen is a series of contradictions in the security cluster during a time of national crisis, which is completely unacceptable.
Okay, but what we do know is that the police claims not to have had forewarning. Okay, so accepting that for the moment, could the police, with its limited resources and budget cuts and fewer policemen than 10 years ago, could they have done more to keep those distribution centers, those malls, from being burnt to the ground?
Yes, absolutely. I think they should have. I think of that SAPS has its own crime intelligence division, which should have picked up certain threats. They should have been able to inform those targets of the looting to increase their private security, and SAPS should have escalated their threat level at their police stations prior to the rampaging, rioting and looting that we saw from Sunday last week. And you know, the bottom line here, Valdemar, is that we have a minister in denial, a security cluster in complete chaos, and factional battles in the ANC, which are playing out, preventing intelligence from flowing through to direct police action, which means that our police services and our security cluster remain captured by a legacy of President Jacob Zuma. And the bottom line remains that President Cyril Ramaphosa has not been able to clean that out and set it on a new trajectory. So yes, SAPS could have done more, and they absolutely should have done more, because anybody who was following social media could see the obvious threats to the state since the gathering at Nkandla on Wednesday.
Right, but there's no use if the police force is uncaptured and reformed, but has no access to rubber bullets, water cannon, tear gas, that kind of thing. I mean, did they have access to the tools of the trade with which you control a crowd, public order policing units in enough parts of KZN in time to prevent this from spiraling out of control?
Well, they've admitted that there's a complete shortage of public order policing. The resources, as we know, are completely constrained. But in spite of that, what we heard this week while I was in Durban on Tuesday with the Portfolio Committee was that they deployed 40,000 rubber bullets in KwaZulu-Natal, 2,180 stun grenades, and 4,670 canisters of tear gas, which is an enormous deployment of resources, but it still wasn't enough. And you know, in spite of whether they had the resources or not, the preemptive capability of SAPS was completely constrained by a lack of intelligence. And so even if they had all of the resources, Valdemar, they should have been able to preempt this by using the intelligence that one minister says that SAPS had, and then obviously the SAPS minister says he doesn't have it.
And Andrew,
there's no reason.
Sorry, you have alleged in media reports that the police had some knowledge of a huge cache of ammunition that was received at Durban Harbour, and that was being stored in Mobeni in a big warehouse there, 1.5 million rounds, if I'm not mistaken. You suggested in the report in Die Burger today that somebody in the police knew about this, or should have known about this. It was under the custody of the police, and it got stolen by looters. Why do you say that the police or somebody in the police should have known about it?
So if you import ammunition or firearms, you need an import license from the South African Police Service, which would have had to be granted months before the import of that ammunition. Secondly, when it arrives in country, At the port, you've got border policing units at the ports plus customs that are required to secure the shipment. And what should ordinarily happen is that the shipment should be sent directly to its destination, which in this case was Gauteng, and it was not. There is allegedly correspondence between the importer and the freight forwarding agency and SAPS to demand that they inspect the shipment or at least send it to Gauteng straight away so that it could be inspected. And that didn't happen. So SAPS is aware that the shipment landed. They were aware that it was at the port. And the minister now denies that SAPS was aware that it was relocated. But it's very hard to believe that it would have been relocated from the secure custody of the Durban harbour to some unsecure location where it would be vulnerable without SAPS's knowledge. I remain convinced that SAPS is very much aware of what happened and potentially even complicit in what has transpired, which would be quite alarming.
Okay, what is also alarming is that these 1.5 million rounds are now out there somewhere. We don't know who has them, and they can yet be used. Are you confident that government is going to find this cache of ammunition and to keep criminals from using this to kill good South African people?
Well, no, I'm not. It's been a week, Valdemar, since that container was looted, which means that I think they've recovered 10,000 rounds by accident at a roadblock about 100 kilometers from the site of the theft of that ammunition. And so by now, I fear that it is obviously in the wrong hands. It's illegal ammunition being distributed through criminal networks. And as we've seen in the last week, this is a battle between the criminal state and the incapable state. And I fear that the criminal state is much better organized, still has its tentacles within the incapable state, if I can put it that way, and that Jacob Zuma's legacy of state capture over the security cluster remains the greatest threat to our country, along with the current security cluster's inability to protect the state and its citizens from these internal threats.
Just wrapping up, when you visited KZN, did you see signs of the massive police presence, which very scared, uncertain South Africans last week insisted should be immediately affected to keep this from flaring up again?
Well, Valdemar, it should come as no surprise as we saw them all around us as parliamentarians. I mean, a big show of force. You know, we saw the army and we saw, large numbers of police officers, generals, tactical response teams. But when I arrived at the airport, I got into my shuttle. And from the airport all the way through to the hotel, I didn't see one police officer. And the airport being a national key point and critical infrastructure for the state, you would assume that you would see a seriously enhanced presence. But there was definitely a show of force for us as politicians, which is not encouraging for the citizens on the street. And then we heard that in spite of commitments that the deployment of the SANDF would be increased, there were still only 2,500 soldiers in KZN by Tuesday. And so the increase in that deployment has not taken place. And I'm not convinced that they have a full handle on the situation.
Andrew Whitfield van die deel, baie dankie.